So we'll make this session, the recording of this session, available after we are done today. So I have to start by thanking our full sponsors and supporters of CNG. They are the reason that we can offer this platform and these free sessions throughout the year. I know we're still virtual. Hopefully sometime soon we'll be going back to some face-to-face interactions as soon as that guidelines is available for us to do that safely and effectively. So we appreciate you holding in with us and certainly appreciate the support of our sponsors, including Prometric, Examity, PSI, Lineup, our friends at Cobalt, Measure Learning, Pearson VUE, and BTL Surpass. We also have supporting level sponsors. These are organizations that also support CNG and allow us to host these free events, including ASIS International, American Association of Medical Assistants, HUMRO, CMAA, SHRM, and the Board of Certified Safety Professionals. I was combining certified and safety there. So thank you all for your support. Our two showcase sponsors for today are Examity and PSI, and I believe in the flow of my slide deck, we have PSI first. And I'm gonna welcome Isabel from PSI. Please go ahead and unmute yourself, Isabel, and if you wanna just give me a verbal cue, I can navigate through these slides.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Cynthia. So hi, everyone. I'm Isabel Gonfi, the new Senior Vice President of Assessment Services at PSI. You can go to the next slide, Cynthia. And as I think most of you know, PSI is a full-service certification provider. We've been in business for over 75 years. We have over 350 clients in the U.S. We have a large number of psychometricians and test developers that are dedicated working with those certification clients. We also offer multimodal test delivery. We have test centers globally in 120 countries, and of course, offering online proctoring and event testing. So in 2020, so last year we delivered over 17 million exams, with 4 million of those exams being via online proctoring. And so far, tracking really well to exceed those numbers for this year. The next slide gets into super quickly in terms of the PSI psychometrics difference. Of course, you know, I'm a big fan of psychometrics and test development. It's all about a partnership and expertise. You know, the emphasis on consulting, then flexibility and innovation where we are working with different methodologies. We're working with performance-based exams, alternate exam items. Of course, accreditation is a big thing, very, very important. NCC experience, ISO 17024, ABSNC. And we've worked with a variety of professions and practice areas. So really leveraging our expertise across the board. Finally, just wanted to highlight some of our services that relates to data forensics and our data forensics program. So it's an important key service, obviously very important these days, always has been important, but we're leveraging a team of psychometricians working closely with our global security services to identify, monitor, and address and act on potential issues as it relates to test security. So working with key experts to maintain the integrity of your program and ensuring direct and comprehensive reporting of issues. Finally, just kind of want to say thank you. Hopefully this meeting's gonna meet your expectations, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you in person at the ICE conference. We'll be there and want to touch base with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I am very excited to see, hopefully, most of you at the ICE conference. I've already started getting my packing list together because I'm so excited to go. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to PSI for your support. I believe we have Khalil from Examity on the line. Khalil, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, and again, just give me a verbal cue, and I will work through your slides.
All right, thank you so much. Hopefully everyone's able to hear me just fine. Good morning. My name is Khalil Blase, and yes, I promise that's my real last name. I've had the good fortune of working with Examity since 2018, but began in online proctoring in 2012 after spending a number of years in IT operations. That's really allowed me a front row seat to the evolution of online proctoring, online learning, and certification. So I'm excited to be here this morning. Next slide, please. So when Examity entered the marketplace in 2013, we set out to deliver a solution to our partners and to test takers with really three core pillars in mind. And those three core pillars in mind were security, convenience, and a solution that's cost effective. So we're going to talk about that for just a few moments. Now, one of the things that we're going to be spending our time talking about today is value proposition. So we realize that a key component to the value that many organizations offer in the marketplace is certifications. So the ability to deliver certifications in a seamless and secure way is really key, and online proctoring is one way to further enhance the value of your certification program. So from a security perspective, well, how do we do that at Examity? Well, in addition to confirming the identity of the tester, recording the webcam, audio and video, and all the on-screen activity, many organizations are concerned about protecting the content of their exams, their item bank. After working with hundreds of customers and proctoring millions of exams, we found that a low proctor to test taker ratio is really key, especially for high stakes exams and programs, because it allows for focused oversight and really attentive service as folks are going through the exam process. We pair the low proctor to test taker ratio with features like content mask and lockdown browsing to further secure exam content. We mentioned convenience a moment ago as well. This is really important because it allows test takers to really test anytime and anywhere. We found that flexibility is also a really high success factor as it relates to programs being successful. And again, the focus is on flexibility and convenience for test takers and for program and test sponsors. And as a result, our solution is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, so that candidates can complete their exams whenever they want to, when it's most convenient for them. And then you as a customer have the ability to access the results that are associated with those exams through Examity's customer dashboard 24/7. What are the results in connection with this level of flexibility and also security? Well, you're able to increase your candidate pool. We think that more choices means more opportunities to really find the best employees that are in the marketplace. And it also leads to increasing the amount of available talent because folks have that level of convenience. We found that it also reduces the hiring cycle as far as the time that it takes for folks to move through the talent acquisition process. And we really think that the ability to advance top talent by having an experience that is pleasant, a joy, a delight even, for test takers is really important. So those are some of the key benefits that we've seen in connection with an approach that is seamless and secure. And of course, we talked a moment ago about a program that's cost effective or a solution that's cost effective. So thank you so much for taking the time to attend today's sessions. If you'd like to learn more about Examity, I'd love to be in touch. I'm excited to be here. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you, Khalil. I do love the last name. It does definitely give you a little talking point there, too. That was great. Thank you. Well, thank you again to all of our sponsors, our two featured sponsors, as well as everybody that supported a CNG this year. We certainly appreciate it. Elisa, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our session for today.
Great. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you so much to our sponsors, and thank you to our presenters coming up. This session, just high bullet points, deals with the ways to approach and develop your organization's value proposition research, and how you use it. We'll start with what is meant by value proposition of a certification. How does an organization create a value proposition for the certification? What can you learn from the study, and how can organizations use the results? And I will say that today's three presenters come from different backgrounds, different approaches, and I think you'll get a good cross-section of how different organizations are approaching it from the client side and also the customer side. Yeah. So our first speaker today is Jason Way. He's the Senior Research Psychologist at ACT, and he's on the Social, Emotional, and Academic Learning Research team. His research interests include the assessment and development of behavior and psychosocial skills including the relevance to important academic and work outcomes. And I think that he'll bring a wonderful perspective to this conversation from the analytical and research and psychometric side. Next, please. Next is Usma Mohammed, and she's Vice President of Brand Experiencing and Marketing at CFPR. She's responsible for overall marketing results of the organization. She oversees the integrity of the brand, communications, and marketing strategies, as well as efforts to strengthen the organization's market position to achieve the desired mission, objective, and goals. She brings more than 20 years of brand and marketing experience in commercial, international, not-for-profit organization experience. And prior to joining the council, she was the global head of marketing and communication at the International Baccalaureate, which is a leading global education nonprofit. She has led various international change management initiatives and branding and marketing campaigns in various languages and international settings. She has spoken on multiple international conferences and events worldwide, including the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Her academic credentials include an advanced level education from the UK, a Bachelor of Science degree in International Marketing Management, and a Master's in Nonprofit and Associate Management from the University of Maryland. Thank you so much, Usma, for joining us with your perspectives as well. And finally, we have Ty Kenworthy, who's the Manager of Research Services and Business Development at Pearson VUE. He oversees Pearson VUE's research efforts in the IT certification market, in addition to working as a business development manager in that same space. Ty's education background is in qualitative research methods and cultural anthropology. He has been with Pearson VUE in their 30-point business since early 2010. And Ty is going to speak about some of the results that his team has garnered in the IT world. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Jason, and I'm going to disappear.
Thank you all. Jason, I'll let you go ahead and share your slides. And just a reminder, as Jason's doing that if you have any questions, we'll save some time at the end of each speaker's portion, but you can go ahead and put any questions in the chat. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. So I'm looking forward to talking with you all about some of the work that we've been doing at ACT and also hearing from other speakers about the work that they're doing. So I, like has been mentioned, I work at ACT, so the college testing company, doing research around primarily social and emotional skills, but also around some efficacy work for our products and services. And so we'll get into what I mean about efficacy in a little more detail in a little bit, but primarily efficacy, when we think about it at ACT, is doing research to support the claims that we're making about our products and services. And for this, I think value proposition and claim, you can basically consider those to be equivalent. So claims are important, and having evidence to back them up about our products and services, of course, is very important. Because what happens when products don't live up to their claims? Well, we disappoint customers and potentially tarnish our brand. So a few whimsical examples here. If we're expecting a decent sized kiddie pool, and that's what we end up with when we unbox the box from Amazon, we're going to be disappointed that that claim of being an appropriate size clearly has not been followed through on. With the holidays coming up, we're probably all looking for Christmas trees, and so if we're expecting something like this, and that's what comes out of the box, again, not exactly living up to what was originally promised. And then potentially the most egregious, if we're expecting a St. Nicholas chocolate candy for Christmas, but it's actually a repurposed Easter bunny. So potentially very egregious, depending on how you feel about your chocolate shapes. Worse than disappointing customers potentially is that there could be legal implications. So I don't know how many of you are aware of the company Lumosity. They were an app that advertised these brain games, so they called them, that would supposedly help to stave off cognitive decline and keep mental function. But unfortunately, those claims were not actually supported, and they ended up having to pay $2 million to settle a suit against deceptive advertising. So we we do have to be careful about the claims that we make and the value propositions that we offer and make sure that we have the appropriate evidence to support them. And efficacy research is a big part of that. So the two broad kinds of research that we do at ACT are validity research and efficacy research. Again, I'll talk more about what those mean in just a second. So for guiding the validity work at ACT, we have a document that we refer to called the Standards for Educational and Psychological Testing. And these are standards published by the testing professionals in the industry, assessment experts, assessment researchers. So they're not company specific or anything like that. They're just a set of guidelines that are recommended for assessment publishers to follow to make sure that their products are showing the appropriate validity evidence. But up until a couple of years ago, we really didn't have anything guiding efficacy work around supporting claims or value propositions. We just sort of had a scattershot approach, or different groups would do their own thing. We didn't really have a unified approach. And so that unified approach is something that we came up with and that I'm going to talk about in the main part of my presentation. So first, just to differentiate validity. So according to the standards that I just mentioned, validity really refers to the degree to which evidence and theory support the interpretation of test scores for a proposed use. So it's not a quality or a checkbox that a product or an assessment has. It's not that you have validity or you don't. It's really a continuum about the confidence that you feel behind the interpretation of the claims or the test scores that result from an assessment. And there's a lot of different kinds of evidence that you can draw upon to support a validity argument. So evidence based on the content of the test, or how people respond to it, how psychometrically sound is that test in terms of its internal structure, how does it relate to other variables that you would expect those test scores to predict, certain outcomes and those sorts of things. And then evidence based on consequences of the use of those assessment scores. And here's some typical research activities employed to start to get at each of those different kinds of evidence. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but just to highlight a couple examples from each of these categories. So for evidence according to the test content, you want to make sure that the test content is appropriately sampling whatever area of interest. So in the case of the ACT, we want to make sure that we're assessing content on the ACT college entrance exam that actually represents what's being taught in classrooms around the country. So we do a national curriculum survey every year that goes out to teachers to ask them about what they're teaching, what kinds of content, how they're doing it, so that we can make that exam as representative as possible to what's actually happening in the classroom during student learning. So response process. So this is how students would interact with the test items. So for this, we could give students some sample items, in kind of a face-to-face and in a cog lab setting. And cognitive lab really just means, sitting down and having the students go through the items in front of you and kind of talk about what they're thinking as they move through the process of responding to the item. And then internal structure is psychometrically how sound is the assessments, and there's a number of different boring statistics that we could talk about there that I will spare you all the details of. So for relations to other variables, so we can do things like concordance studies, differential validity studies. Basically, we would expect that ACT scores, for example, to predict college outcomes, and so we would want to do those studies to make sure that those relationships are actually holding up to what we expect, according to the relation to those other variables like that. And then finally, consequences of testing. So doing an efficacy study, what kinds of outcomes are we expecting from this product or service? What kind of return on investment are we getting, or what kind of impact is this having on the examinees? So efficacy evidence, so formal definition for efficacy here refers to the degree to which evidence, rationales, and theory support the claim that a learning tool improves intended learner outcomes. And again, this is from the ACT perspective. as to how we defined efficacy based on the products and services that we offer. So this would look obviously different depending on what your company does and what those value propositions are. So there's a general kind of framework of efficacy that is popular in the employee training research literature. And I imagine this is probably familiar to a lot of you. So there's 4 levels here. You can think about it in terms of a pyramid. That first level is just reaction. So how do people react to the product, the service, the training program, whatever it is? You kind of think about it as, thumbs up, thumbs down. Did they like it? Did they not? The level above that would be learning. So how much are they learning or taking away from a training program? Kind of independent of whether or not they like it, or they actually take something out of it that they could take back to their job. And then above that is behavior. So, maybe they liked it, maybe they learned a lot, but did the behavior of the employee actually change once they got back on the job? So that's a third level there. And then finally at the top, you have impact. So, maybe they liked it, maybe they learned a lot from that training and they changed their behavior. But if it didn't ultimately have an impact on an important outcome for them or for the company, how effective really was that training program. So, these levels build on each other. And ultimately you're hoping that whatever intervention that you're doing is having some kind of impact at the end, in addition to providing learning opportunities and opportunities to change behavior in effective ways. So that's kind of a company agnostic way to think about different outcomes that can result from a program or service that your company offers. So mapping some of the evidence that we talked about to the outcomes here. So things like user experience. So, do people like it, or what was their experience as they moved through? Connects to, how the person would feel about that program. And then things like content, or how personalized, or what kind of learning opportunities that program offered, all kind of feed into that user experience, and also influence some of the outcomes that I just talked about there, like learning. And then things like implementation fidelity, so how close to the ideal was that training program delivered, also has an influence on how effective that program was in delivering that learning opportunity. And then others, like relations to other variables, impact, ultimately influences how effective those programs are in changing behavior or having impact on the important outcomes of interest. So here's some, we talked about this for validity research. So if we're looking at efficacy evidence, some of those areas there that I just talked about, what are some research activities associated with those? And again, I'll just highlight a couple examples instead of going through all of these, but you can see some similar here. We've got CogLab going into that user experience. Even something as simple as like a customer survey or a focus group can be a really good way of collecting that kind of evidence. For content, looking at alignment studies, standard setting, job analyses, really just making sure that the content of the program is appropriate to whatever setting that you're trying to learn about. So personalization often has to do with, this is sort of a newer trend, I think, in the industry, where with technology advances in AI and machine learning algorithms, we can offer a greater degree of personalization. So collecting some initial information about the student going through a module or taking an exam, and being able to personalize that content a little bit in order to try and improve engagement. So that's something that we've been thinking about more at ACT recently. So learning, looking at efficacy studies, if the learning program is effective, is a really good way to see how students are learning within that module. I talked about implementation fidelity, so just seeing how appropriate that program was implemented according to whatever guidelines were given. And then relations to other variables and impact, pretty similar to what I mentioned for validity before. So really just making sure that the scores resulting from a program or from an assessment are relating to other factors as you would expect, and that they're having kind of those down the line impacts that you hope to see as a result of using that program. So how would we integrate those two things? So a validity argument and an efficacy argument into a single efficacy framework. Again, this is what we did at ACT. We think this works for us according to the products and services that we offer, and obviously this is going to look different depending on each individual company or program, depending on what their offerings are and how they're structured. So this is kind of how we organize this to think about integrating these two things, validity and efficacy, into sort of an ideal model of what we would like to see when doing these kinds of efficacy research studies. So you can see the blue boxes there, kind of in the first and the third columns, are measurement instances where we would want to assess the students before and after they go through some kind of learning or intervention program, which is that second column there. So you do a pre-test, you have all these issues to think about validity, like I talked about before, so content and consequences, psychometrics of internal structure, and those sorts of things. Then you have the students go through a learning or the program or the intervention or whatever it is that they're going to be, kind of program that they're going to be experiencing. And you can see some of the sources of evidence there that I talked about in relation to efficacy. And then you would want to do a post-test or a post-intervention measurement with the idea of seeing if there's any change in assessment scores as a result of the learning program. So, and of course, the assessment needs to be tailored to the content of the learning program so that you can be sure you're assessing everything appropriately. So that when you look at pre-test to post-test, you can be confident that scores are changing as a result of the content of the learning program or the intervention, rather than just something else. And there's other research design issues in there, of course, but I'll kind of gloss over those for now. And then finally, what kind of impact or outcomes or results is that learning program having on important outcomes of interest? And in the educational realm, this is going to be things like learning, going to be things like grades, staying in school, graduating on time, achieving credentials. And then in the workplace, this could be something like continued employment or getting a new job, performing more effectively on the job, being more satisfied, job tenure, so staying at your job for longer, being promoted, higher salary, so on and so forth. So just to think about some of the different types of claims that we could make, if we're thinking about efficacy, so things like anecdotal claims, what kind of study designs would we want in order to collect evidence for making an anecdotal claim? This would be things like customer feedback, customer surveys, getting an endorsement from someone who's used the product and thought it was effective, collecting feedback from focus groups on whether or not they thought the product was effective. More descriptive claims, and this could be something like surveys, just surveying a bunch of people, seeing what they say about it in order to just make a claim about describing the product and what it offers. Correlational predictive claims. So cohort analysis really just means if you have a group of people going through this product or service, you want to get some feedback from them in order to see, what do their scores predict in terms of different kinds of outcomes. So you can't necessarily make a causal claim there because the type of evidence isn't quite suited to that. But you can start to say that, if a student goes through this course, then they seem to be able to perform this skill or learn this content at a higher level. So where you can start to make those more causal claims about a program directly impacting outcomes of interest are in studies listed under comparative claims and causal claims, which where you're getting into these randomized control trials, which I think you often hear about those in the news from things like medical studies and that sort of thing, where you have the new medicine and then you have a group doing a placebo and they don't know which is which, and so then they track everyone to see how their symptoms improve. Ideally, the new medicine does better than the placebo group, which isn't actually receiving any medicine. So that's sort of a real basic randomized control trial, and we can do that sort of thing for evaluating other kinds of programs as well. So have students go through a new program or a new intervention, have another group of students who doesn't receive any programming or just receives the old version, and you can take the end results at both of those groups and compare them and be able to make a fairly strong causal claim, as long as the research study is designed appropriately, that the new program hopefully does better than either no program or the old program that you were looking to potentially replace. So as far as a process for how all of this fits together in terms of our work at ACT, so first we would want to develop a theory of action. So this is just documenting how we think that a new program or product or service, what's the existing research on it? What do we think is going to happen when students interact with this program? And what kind of research is out there to show what we might expect? And so then, once we kind of know what's out there, we would separately want to make a list of, claims or value propositions, that we're hoping to result from the use of this product or service. And then we kind of have those two things. We can look at them side by side and say, okay, what research or knowledge do we already have compared to what claims are we hoping to make? And are there any gaps there that we need to fill, either with some kind of research study or customer survey, focus group, any of the different sources of evidence that we've been talking about. And so the results of that gap analysis, where any gaps there are identified, can be used to inform the setting of a research agenda and how those research studies are prioritized. And then once those studies are executed and we've analyzed the data, published the findings, that can go back into reinforcing that theory of action and making it more robust in terms of the documentation of different research findings that we have to support the claims or the value propositions that we're trying to make, and then just kind of and keep on going in that circle. All right, so that's all the content I have. I'm happy to answer questions now. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Jason. Sorry, I'm just pulling up the chat video or chat feature here. I don't see any questions that came in at this point. Does anyone want to put something in the chat, or if not, we'll ask Usma to get ready to share her screen.
Cynthia, this is Alyssa. I did have a question in there. Actually,
Sure.
I put it in, maybe I put it in the wrong spot, actually, but Jason, I know that you and I have worked together, but here's a question. In terms of the Kirkpatrick's evaluation model, do you try to say, I'm going to have X amount of questions if you're dealing with a survey or some sort of interview? Do you build the number of questions with each level of the model, or do you try to have some sort of, like, in order to get a good sense of the reaction, how it's functioning, do you have a minimum amount of questions that deal with each topic of that pyramid?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as is often the answer in research, the answer is it depends. So it depends on how long has the product or service been in the market. If it's newly released, or it's only been on the market for a short amount of time, we might not expect enough time to have passed to be able to get at more of those longer term sorts of outcomes, like behavior change or ROI, or impacting other kinds of results down the line, simply because not a lot of time has passed. And so for each, I wouldn't say that there's a minimum number of questions for each level that we think about. It really depends on the specific things that we're interested in knowing within each of those 4 levels. So there's psychometric guidelines that provide recommendations on the number of items for if you're trying to measure a very specific variable or construct. But if you're just trying to ask, that first level of evidence, like reaction, do people like it? Would they do it again? You can answer those questions, those kinds of research questions with a fairly small number of items, for example. Depending on, what you're interested in looking at, some of the higher levels, you'd have to get, a larger number of questions, especially for something like learning, if you're interested in their, how much are they learning? You might have to give them more of like an exam length type of questionnaire, just depending on the situation and what kind of content you're interested in. I hope that's helpful. I'm sorry, it's not very specific.
No, thank you. And Cynthia, a question for you.
Yeah, we do have one more question. Christine asked how you measure and determine the return on investment.
Right. You mentioned that on slide 8 and then again on slide 15.
Yeah. So, again, I think it depends on, your company and what kind of products you're offering. So for some of the research that we have looked at in my job specifically around social emotional learning, we look at, the amount of dollars that go into a program and then, trying to kind of estimate the value of positive outcomes coming out of that program. So, and not just research that we've done, but research by other, people out there looking at these kinds of questions as well. So, for example, there was a study a few years ago that, putting in $1 into social emotional learning programs resulted in $11 of return on investment. But that was at a societal level. So things like, reduced poverty levels, reduced, people who were incarcerated, better employment, all these sorts of things. So it's, and that's pretty high level. But as far as like a product or service looking at ROI, really just kind of looking at, the cost that went into development and administration, according to what, the benefits were down the line. So, as this company is seeing, higher sales because they had their marketing and sales teams go through this training. And so now they're making X number of dollars more in sales than they were before their employees went through this training. That would be, I think, a pretty straightforward way of looking at ROI for that kind of training program. So it's going to be pretty idiosyncratic depending on just the situation, and what the product or service is in question.
Great. I think we can go ahead and switch over to Uzma at this point. We'll keep pushing forward. Uzma, if you want to share your screen, you should be good to go.
Okay. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Uzma Mohammed, and I'm the Vice President of Brand Experience and Marketing at the Council for Professional Recognition. The Council for Professional Recognition is a leader in the credentialing of early childhood educators worldwide. We have close to 1 million educators who hold the CDA, the Child Development Associate credential. And the CDA is actually going to be the example that I'm going to use in this presentation. So this is going to be our focus for today, and I'm hoping that this will help guide the presentation, as well as share with you some key areas that we will be highlighting throughout. So what is a value proposition and what is not a value proposition? So I first thought, okay, let's talk about what it isn't. So It's actually not a logo. It's not images. It's not messaging. It's not data. And it's not a tagline. So in my world, a value proposition is a deep understanding of the customer and their needs and delivering to their demands. And here is what a value proposition is. So again, in my world, that's why I come from brand experience and marketing, and the customer is our ultimate focus. And the value proposition is about the customer. So I'm not going to read these bullets verbatim, but it's the promise of a value to be delivered, communicated, and acknowledged. According to a recent survey, and I was looking at, when I was putting together this presentation, how I could really hone in on some sort of platform that possibly this group would be familiar with. And HubSpot had a really good survey from 2019 that actually put value proposition as the @1 element that improves the actual value and the revenue for a product. And, at the end of the day, the value proposition is the ingredient that offers the aim to solve what your competitors' products cannot. Okay, so this is actually, a slide that, I put together, and I thought, okay, so let me see if I can kind of share with you in my world the 3 ingredients that we at the Council for Professional Recognition, and even with my previous experience with the International Baccalaureate, what we would first really focus on when we were thinking about developing a value proposition for a product. So on the left-hand side, you will see 3 pieces of information: the organization's offering, what the customer needs, and the marketplace offerings. And then on the right-hand side, I've sort of transitioned that into an example for the CDA. So the product, organization offering is a child development associate credential. What the customer needs is practical ECE experience. So the CDA is a credential that is of practice. The educator is ready day 1. And that is what we heard, that's what they needed, and hence the CDA promises that. And then the last bubble here is the marketplace offering. So to be honest with you all, based on the CDA price point and what the CDA does, is, in my view, there isn't a direct competitor to the CDA, but there are substitutes out there. There are, alternative modes of education and credentialing out there. And an example that we take into consideration as we develop and refine the CDA credential is the various state credentials that exist. So here are 5 steps that help me even in the past, and even with my experience with the council, in thinking through how to create a value proposition. So what I thought about doing for this slide is I would kind of go through each step and align it to the CDA. So step number 1, demonstrate the benefit. A benefit of the CDA is that the credential is globally accepted. So this is a credential that we have educators in Egypt, for example. We have educators in China, for example. So it is the benefit of this credential is that it is globally accepted. Number 2, describe the value. So when we think about the CDA, like I said in point number 1, it is globally accepted. That means that it is portable. It is portable, it's recognized everywhere, and it's actually considered a credential, as with project management certification, hands-on, right? So that is a benefit of value that we correlate with the actual credential. Number 3, identify value of your product. So and again, I'm just using an example for each of these sections. But one of the values of the credential is that you are ready day one to work with children birth through 5 years old. And you can work anywhere in the world because the credential is built on global competencies that have been tried and tested. Step 4, connect. How can you connect this to the actual educator, right? What kind of problem or pain point does the CDA help an educator achieve? Pay raise, they can step into leadership role, they can build on their existing portfolio. And finally, differentiate. So this is actually one of my favorite parts of when I develop a value proposition is what makes us different. And so for the CDA, it is cost effective, the process is online, and most importantly, excellent customer service along the way. So those are some of the ideas I put forward to this group when they think about developing a value proposition for a credential or even for a product or service. These steps have served me really well and furthered, the growth of the CDA credential in being relevant to the customer. So you're probably wondering, okay, so Uzma, so it's great. You shared with us 5 steps, right? But how do you find the answers to these questions? So like I said, it's about the customer. So I'm not sure how many individuals are familiar, but there's an economist, Edward Freeman, and in 1994, he put forward a theory called the stakeholder theory. And ultimately what he says is this: you can't look at any one stakeholder and make a decision on a product or service, right? You have to think about all your stakeholders that are impacted by this product. So I've just given a visual of 2 groups, internal and external, and this is the audience base that we engage with in order to create a new value proposition or even to enhance an existing value proposition. So this is the group that we engage in the process to help us with the questions to the 5 steps that I previously shared. So here are some of the questions, that we consider as part of engaging with the stakeholders, because, you want to make sure you engage with internal and external stakeholders to establish buy-in, to make sure that they trust, right? They trust that their feedback is going to be considered when the value proposition of a product is being developed. And here are some of the questions that we ask. I'm not going to go through this verbatim, but we do work very heavily with our research department, and we need them and we love them, and they provide us with excellent questions, right, to make sure that the decision that we make, yes, it's based on data, but it's informed data decision making. When we look at the information and the responses from internal and external stakeholders, our research team gives us sort of a modeling approach for us to build on a value proposition for a credential or a product or service. So the questions that I just shared, how do we gather, right? How do we gather feedback from our stakeholders? And we use qualitative and quantitative approaches, and I've just highlighted 3 here. And in each section, so for example, focus group, surveys, and even a pilot, because actually we do end up sharing products a little bit early with some of our stakeholders to get some real-time user feedback, which is very helpful in refining a value proposition before the product is delivered into the market. But focus groups and surveys have really served us well because it's information that you can, go back to You can, especially with focus groups, it's very two-way, right? You can dig a little bit deeper and respond to individuals' concerns or share or ask them to talk a little bit more about something. And of course, surveys are really useful because it gives you a sort of a snapshot of whether you're moving in the right direction or things that you need to consider. And it takes time, right? It takes patience and time. So creating a value proposition, you know, in my world is actually a very fun thing to do, right? We enjoy doing that, but we have to make sure that what we put out is achievable and it's true. And that's where all this, the 5 steps, you know, engaging the stakeholders, sharing the questions, making sure that the stakeholders are engaged in one of these or all of these approaches. So we reach our stakeholders and we share and invite them to focus groups, share surveys with them through these 3 approaches. So fast forward now. So pretend like, you know, you have all the information and you're looking at all the data and you're thinking, right, I'm ready to, like, you know, create this wonderful value proposition. So here are what I like to call the Fantastic 4. And so it's your headline, your subhead, and 3 bullet points and a visual, right? So your headline needs to be clear. Your subhead, and I'm going to share an example actually after this slide so you can see in action. It needs to be specific. Then there's 3 bullet points that you want to make sure that the customer is able to quickly relate to. And then you always want to make sure that you have a visual to connect so it's recognizable, so you're differentiated from other products or services out there. So let me now show you an example of how this works as we created and refined the CDA credential value prop. Here it is. Okay. So you see here, the headline is very simple, right? Because that's what resonated directly, you know, with our stakeholders. They want to know what it exactly was. The subhead, advancement into the early childhood education sector. So this is where, you know, we asked individuals, okay, talk to us about what the CDA means to you. And we received various responses, and fast forward, and this is our subhead for the actual product. The 3 bullet points. This is almost like the validation, right? So the previous presenter, he talked about, you know, can you prove these things? And the answer is yes, we can. Yes, we can. And finally, the visual that connects, you know, the product and differentiates it from other credentials out there. So finally, okay, so everyone's so happy now, right? They have this value proposition and it's in the market and it's doing really well. So now what? To be honest with you, you know, it's in the best interest of any organization, especially if you have a competitive advantage, to keep a pulse on how the credential or product is continuously perceived in the market, right? And you got to be able to make sure that you're able to tweak it along the way. You know, remembering that, you know, customer perceptions change. The market changes. Competitors, believe it or not, start to innovate, right? New legislation comes in place. You have to consider policies out there. And you have to make sure that your value proposition is relevant and effective for your end customer, right? So in this case, it's the educator. There are various continuous improvement models out there. You know, at the council, we use Kaizen as well as Lean Six Sigma. There are others out there. It's very easy to, you can just Google it, and they all take on a similar kind of approach that you see here. So that's all I had for you today. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Uzma. This is Cynthia. I put in the chat, one of your slides talks about the different questions that your program is asking stakeholders, and you're using those answers to develop the value proposition. So I'd love to hear from others on the call on are you using similar questions, or what other direct questions are you using that's getting you a good response, I guess is the key there. But my question for Uzma is, how often are you revisiting the value proposition? When you're talking about getting feedback through focus groups or surveys, how often are you doing that? And how, how much is that changing kind of the messaging you're using to promote that value proposition?
Yes. So we actually, I would say every 12 to 18 months, we issue a survey, just make sure that our customers are seeing value in the product. But my department in particular, we have what you call pulse surveys that we send out to our customers every sort of 3 to 6 months. So we are continuously tweaking, and our credentialing department do a fantastic job in making sure that the credential is actually being updated for future themes and perspectives as the sector evolves. So to answer your question directly, every 12 to 18 months is when we really sit down and we look at it.
Okay.
But it varies, obviously, right? So, I mean, every organization.
Right. Are there other questions? Yeah, of course. Other questions that anyone has? Christine asked how many people you've certified. What do your numbers look like?
Oh my goodness. We have certified, thank you for your question. God, I should have, yes, close to 1 million educators we have certified. So we have thousands in our pipeline, and our credentialing team are working very diligently to move them through our quality control process. So yes, we are close to 1 million. So we're very, very happy to announce that.
Yeah, with that large volume, I have to ask a follow-up. Are you, how much are you customizing the value proposition, or again, how you're messaging that to different segments within that audience? That's probably a larger group of credential holders than some of us might deal with. So, how are you segmenting that audience, and how much are you customizing the value depending on those segments?
Yeah, so the good news is that the CDA is a foundational practical approach to teaching. So the good news is the main premise of what the CDA is really doesn't change to any of our key audiences in terms of, home visitor setting. We have the training center setting. The only thing that really changes is the actual where we would promote to those individuals, but the value proposition itself really does not change. But with that said, when we work with policymakers or parents, especially our advocacy group, we do change the value proposition so they are able to advocate for the CDA in their state or even in their center. But to our educators, we actually do very small tweaks, if any. Our messaging is very clear.
Great. So Ty, I'll ask you to go ahead and get your slides ready. I don't see any other questions coming into the chat right now. Just scrolling through to make sure I didn't miss any. So thank you, Usa. We really appreciate your time and sharing your experience with your group. Ty, we will kick it over to you.
All right, can you all hear me? Cynthia?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join you today. Although I will admit I feel somewhat like Visigoth among the Romans, being connected to the IT certification space. I promise I have no intentions of sacking the CNG though, so I think y'all are safe. I was told, however, it's more like being a long lost cousin, crashing a family reunion coming from the IT side. But it's my opportunity to share with you some of the research that we have done in the IT certification space about the value of IT certification at Pearson VUE. I will also mention I usually like to put a lot of jokes in and test new material for a stand-up routine I'll never do. But my daughter said that it's never good and my jokes never land. So I'll try to play it pretty straight this morning for you. So before we dive into the meat of that report that I talked about in our key findings, I just wanted to give a little bit of background as to what we've done, how we've done it, and how long we've been doing it. So Pearson VUE has been publishing the Value of IT Certification report since 2014. Now, our surveys that have informed this report and our structure of interviews and focus groups have changed over the years. And we ask questions that are pertinent to the current state of the ever-changing IT landscape. We've refined and added to our research and analysis methodologies over time too. We learn from each preceding survey ways to improve the next. And this is the 7th Value of Certification report we've published. And maybe this is stating the obvious, but it's the most refined report yet due to our continual polishing of this research project over the years. In addition to refinements in questions and surveying methods, we've also expanded our reach and the number of languages we support. In fact, this year we sent the survey out to 373,000 candidates from 165 countries and in 5 languages. We received 29,000 responses to our survey, and this is among our highest number of responses to this survey yet. And these responses were distributed very well across all geos and regions. I do want to make a note of the only survey candidates from IT certification sponsors who opt in to participate in this research project. Even though the survey may not reach candidates for all IT certification programs delivered by Pearson VUE, much less the broader market, we have a wide enough range of participating sponsors that we are confident that the results we published can be applied broadly throughout the IT certification market. And we also validate our findings against other kind of watchdog reports in the IT certification space. So, what do we have to say about IT certification in this year's report? We actually have a lot to say, but after months of analysis, we are comfortable boiling down the results into 4 key findings. First, we see a growing demand for IT certification. Second, we better understand candidates' primary motivations for pursuing IT certification. Third, we have expanded insight into the return on investment for IT certification to both employees and employers. And fourth, we better understand the lifelong credentialing journey of candidates who pursue IT certification. Now, I do want to have just one more aside before jumping into the findings. I feel I need to address the proverbial elephant in the room. It should not come as a surprise that the global COVID-19 pandemic impacted both our research efforts and the subjects of our research. Consequently, we had to delay both the research and the report to 2021 as we, our certification sponsors, and our candidates grappled with the impacts of COVID-19. So let's address this question of how COVID-19 impacted IT certification first before digging in on the rest of the results. COVID-19 forced many companies to tighten the belt, so to speak. Non-critical expenses were put on hold for much of 2020, and some continue austerity practices still. One area that saw contraction was employer contributions to employee training and certification. This was a tough call for many companies as employees reportedly had more time on their hands due to lockdowns and saw upskilling as a good use of that extra time. Also, with the sudden increased dependence on technology for remote working and for providing services to customers in new ways, we saw companies and employees scramble to develop the skills to support these new ways of doing business. Despite all this, only 30% of candidates indicated that the pandemic influenced their interest in obtaining IT certification. While the pandemic may have raised awareness of skills that were needed, most candidates were intent on pursuing IT certification regardless of COVID-19. That said, many candidates did take advantage of the time suddenly afforded them to complete their certification goals. Like the certification candidate from India, that's quoted here on the screen. Ultimately, while it would be foolish to say that COVID-19 didn't impact learning and certification in 2020, we did find that overall, results were consistent with previous years within an acceptable range, such that we can say that despite impacts from the pandemic, IT certifications were as strong as ever last year. In fact, the IT certification market was stronger than ever last year. Exam deliveries in 2020 were up 16% over the previous year, and that is even with testing grinding nearly to a halt in March and building up through June as IT certification sponsors embraced or expanded their online proctoring offerings. And while IT certification volumes have enjoyed consistent year-over-year growth for the past decade, this level of growth during one of the most costly, disruptive, and tragic pandemics in recent history is actually still astonishing. Candidate responses to our survey give us confidence that this growth is not slowing down anytime soon. 86% of respondents indicated that they were likely to pursue additional training and certification in the next year. This is a significant percentage that indicates confidence in continued growth in IT certifications. The rapid pace of change in technologies has largely driven this growth over time. The pandemic accelerated this for many companies by forcing a comprehensive shift in the ways that companies use technology to power their customer solutions and internal management. It prompted many companies to adopt the latest cloud, cybersecurity, and software development technologies faster than they had planned pre-pandemic. Consequently, employees had to just as quickly learn and develop the commensurate skills to keep pace with the changes. And all signs point to this being the beginning of a trend rather than a one-time catch-up. Respondents have given us insight into the changing landscape of priority skills in IT that they are pursuing now and have plans to pursue in the very near future. With many companies now supporting distributed workforces and more customers expecting to consume services in ways and places convenient to them, it shouldn't be too surprising to see cloud computing make huge gains in 2020 and 21 over 2019. And even less surprising to see its continued growth forecasted throughout the remainder of this year and into 2022. The same can be said for networking and wireless, virtualization, cybersecurity, and security skills, with forecasted growth rates of 60%, 324%, 405%, and 366% respectively. IT employers and employees have adapted and continue to adapt to the rapidly changing technology landscape and market demands, which shows no sign of stopping soon. And based on survey responses, the top motivation for candidates seeking IT certification is to obtain skills, knowledge, and competence. In fact, while an astonishing 44% of respondents cited upskilling as their most important reason for seeking IT certification, 73% of respondents cited it as at least one of their motivating factors. That is so pure to me. The thirst for learning and self-improvement is an endearing and noble pursuit. I really appreciated this response from one of CompTIA's candidates, quote, "Increased knowledge is the most important to me because I want to know this stuff, not just have a pretty piece of paper hanging on my wall." The motivation ranked as second most important was to obtain advancement or promotion. 56% of all respondents cited this as one motivation for pursuing certification, with 22% reporting it as the most important. Most of these candidates ended up realizing their goal to obtain advancement or promotion as a result of their certification, which I will share more about momentarily. This had to be especially meaningful to employees who needed that boost during the pandemic. As one respondent from Australia reported, quote, "I have been chasing a promotion for quite some time. I decided to better myself and attain my Facebook Blueprint certification, and I believe this was part of the reason that I was promoted during a hard time for any business during COVID." And the third most important motivation employees had for seeking certification was to enhance their professional profile or resume. Here again, 56% reported this as one factor in their pursuit of IT certification, and 14% identified it as their primary reason. Whether seeking to upskill, get a new job, or boost their resume, our data shows that candidates seeking IT certification had clear objectives in mind as they learned, developed, and ultimately certified their new or refreshed skills. And we know that most of these candidates obtained the goal they were pursuing through certification. At the time of the survey, 7 in 10 respondents reported having met their goals for certification, and 26% still anticipated achieving those goals, but hadn't yet at the time they were surveyed. Despite hiring freezes, staff reductions, and other job-related impacts, companies and employees experienced due to the pandemic, 36% of candidates had already obtained a new job due to their certification, and 21% were promoted in their current job. Now, 28% reported getting a raise. Now, this rate is down 7% from the previous year. Based on other industry reports, along with feedback to our survey, we suspect this is more of a result of tighter expense controls instituted by companies during the pandemic than a reflection of waning value in the certifications earned. Of those who saw a pay increase, 55% saw that increase within 3 months of earning their credential, with 77% of employees seeing that increase within 6 months. And in some great cosmic balancing act, though the rate of candidates obtaining raises was down from last year, the value of the raises earned was up. 50% of these candidates saw a pay increase between 6 and 20%, which is higher than the average 2020 salary increase of 2.5%. Now, it's tempting to see these material, financial benefits of IT certification to candidates and to extol the ROI based on those figures alone. But candidates reported other intrinsic benefits to certification that are significantly impactful on their own. Whether it is an increased confidence in abilities and skills, a broadening of horizons and interest in pursuing new opportunities, or increased job satisfaction and autonomy, IT certification dramatically improves many facets of an employee's work life. These are the less tangible, but no less critical benefits that can mitigate real issues like burnout, overly high turnover, and employees feeling stuck or trapped in a job. Now, survey respondents who were also hiring managers reported equally impactful intrinsic benefits to companies and employers. They cited IT certification as contributing to improvements in employees' quality of work, increases in innovation and problem solving, and greater efficiency and productivity levels among certified employees. Increased mentoring also ranked high among benefits of certified employees. Considering these and other factors in a separate independent study, Global Knowledge's 2020 IT Skills and Salary Report estimates that the ROI per credentialed employee to be $10,000 in added value. That figure alone is a mic drop moment for why companies should prioritize IT certification in their training and hiring activities. When employees and employers consider the material and intrinsic benefits from IT certification, it is little wonder that we see employees making IT credentialing a lifelong pursuit. 72% of respondents to our 2021 survey already held multiple professional certifications. We see most candidates coming from industry, particularly within the first 2 years of working in a new career. These candidates are pursuing certifications across a range of titles and programs. In fact, 97% of the respondents who reported holding multiple certifications held those certifications in several programs or solutions, with some reporting being certified in as many as 10 separate programs. This suggests an orientation towards a general competency in a broad range of skills versus deep expertise in a narrow range of skills, at least at the outset of one's career. This makes sense too, as you see the peak certification activity happening just before or just as one begins their career journey, and then narrowing as their career progresses. Now, despite a narrowing focus in skills as an individual progresses in their career, the data shows that they continue to remain engaged in certification throughout. In fact, the average number of certifications held per candidate by career level demonstrates a consistent and stable growth in the number of certifications held as one advances through one's career. If certifications were only for the young, then we would expect this line to level out after the 2 to 8 years category. But the growth shows that certification is as relevant to the entry-level worker as the senior executive. Yet, despite the growth in total certifications throughout one's career, we don't see that same correlation to a candidate's level of formal education. If anything, these results suggest a reverse correlative to formal education, with the highest rates of certifications per candidate associated with those who completed a high school or secondary school diploma or those with an associate's degree or functional equivalent. Nevertheless, the variation between the number of certifications per candidate held at each level of formal education is not significant enough to indicate an educational bias one way or the other. Instead, we see certification as the great democratizer, that regardless of formal education background, certification remains important to one's career development. This is ennobling and provocative, particularly in an era of increasing costs of higher education and an ever-widening skills gap being reported and dreaded by employers in the IT space in particular. Certification may play a crucial role in responding to some of these market factors. Now, speaking of employers, our Value of Certification survey has traditionally focused almost exclusively on the value of certification to the candidate. In our 2021 survey, and to lesser degrees in the past, we attempted to get additional feedback from candidates who were also hiring managers or employers. Although this additional feedback proved valuable, we wanted to formally round out our understanding of the value of certification to employers, going back to Uzma's comment that we have lots of different stakeholders and we need to get feedback from all of them. So earlier this year, we conducted a series of interviews and sent out a survey specifically to hiring managers and employers to get their insights into the value of IT certification, both to them and to their businesses. Now, we have a separate report that we've now produced and made available about the IT employer value of certification that I want to share some of the supplemental findings from that research. Critically, our employer value of certification research largely confirmed the insights we learned from hiring managers that responded in our candidate value of certification survey. Our research with employers, however, provided additional context for the results we previously obtained. For instance, we were able to better understand just how embedded IT certification is within companies and in the hearts and mind of employees. When we asked managers whether they had managed employees with IT certifications in the last 12 months, 97% reported that they had. That is an astonishing percentage that demonstrates not only the prevalence of IT certifications in the workforce, but managers' awareness of certification among their employees. And no wonder they're aware of it. In interviews and survey responses, IT managers affirmed that their certified employees were more aware of the latest technologies, including how they are used and the skills needed to implement and maintain them. And they saw this as a crucial advantage to their business, uniquely provided them through their IT certified employees. Additionally, employers observed that IT certified employees appeared better connected with other professionals and resources in their industry. These connections can provide these businesses with a richer flow of ideas, talent, and skill, all critical to maintaining a competitive edge in their markets. And now here are just a few more juicy tidbits from our research that we conducted with managers and employers. First, we do see a majority of employers prioritizing upskilling, training, and development initiatives among their employees. 63% of companies surveyed cover all costs of training and credentialing for their IT employees. This is such an incredible benefit to employees, and as we've shared already, a benefit that returns back to the company in significant ways. As a personal aside, I hope this number is 100% someday. That would be amazing. Second, IT certifications play an important role as employers find and hire the best talent. 60% of the IT managers we surveyed stated that job applications with IT certifications listed were significantly more likely to be reviewed. In competitive job markets like we often see in the IT segment, job candidates need to maximize any advantage to even get an interview. With the numbers we've reviewed here today, it's my opinion that we are fast approaching the point where IT certifications are simply table stakes for job applicants in the IT segment. Finally, IT managers report that their IT certified employees noticeably outperform their non-credentialed peers, helping them to assess a measurable return on employer investment. These managers cited especially that IT certified employees generally produce higher quality work. There are even more insights like these in our employer value of certification report, and we have loads more in our candidates value of certification report. Both are available publicly at Pearson VUE. Go and take advantage of downloading those and being able to see the remainder of the work that we've done. I did want to make mention of one additional thing, and that is that we are looking at this from a market perspective, and the IT, that's a very monolithic view of IT certification. For those IT programs that do participate in our research program, we also do provide specific results from our research back to them that give them a view of how their program is performing against these same measures as compared to the average of the rest of the market. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Cynthia.
Great, thank you. Alyssa, I think you had a couple of questions that I see you sent me in the chat. Do you want to go ahead and open up your line and ask those?
Sure. So I have two questions, Ty. First of all, very, very interesting. And the first one is that you said that this survey has been going out yearly for like the past 7 years of research. I'm presuming that the questions are repeated or there have been some tweaks over time and some additional questions, but presuming that presumption is correct, are there any surprises with any of the responses as they change over time, either in the positive or the negative? That's presuming you're asking the same question.
Yeah, so we do have a set of anchor questions that have remained consistent over time, or at least maybe with a little bit of tweaked in the wording, but overall are obtaining the same data. And those questions have been very helpful to help us understand trending. And I don't know that I would necessarily say surprises, because more I would say that the shift in understanding over time is subtle. So I think I find more surprise if I was to look at when we first started this 7 years ago to responses that we received today. But from a year-to-year basis, we've just seen a subtle shift that, in responses. Probably the more surprising one is, of all of them that has come out, is just the information around the longevity of people engaging in certification. So that the lifelong pursuit kind of concept has really emerged only in the past several years, where we're starting to see more stickiness within programs. And a large part of the feedback that we received, as I mentioned, I do qualitative analysis primarily, so I do a lot of work on the interviews and the focus groups. A lot of the feedback we received is just said that because of the rapid change in IT certification, or in IT, I shouldn't say certification, but just the IT market changes, technologies are constantly coming and going, and now it's kind of put executives, higher level managers, and those that run technology groups kind of on their heels as they see employees that they're hiring at the entry level come in with skills that they just don't have. And so it's over the last several years, we've seen a trend more of those upper level executives starting to come on stronger with levels of certification.
Meaning that they want the certification themselves, or that they're hiring?
That they want that themselves. So they want to be able to keep up with the guys that they just hired in the conversations.
Interesting, great. And the other question that I had was, and I think you alluded to it, that the research that was garnered from the employer was through interviews, and the research garnered from the employee was through a survey. Is that correct? I'd be interested to know how you got the research, how you did the research.
Yeah, so we do a combination of both in both instances. So we start off with high-level interviews to kind of continue to vet that the questions that we have been asking in our survey or would ask in our survey remain relevant, or if there are other things that we should be asking in these surveys. And so we do a set of interviews, then we do a set of focus groups to kind of vet our kind of some of the theses that we're entering into the research with. And then we will, in both cases still do a survey out to the broader audience.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Does anybody else have any questions? If you do, would you kindly unmute yourself and so that you could present your question?
One question, Ty, this is Cynthia. Would you be able to share the link to this report in the chat? I think you said it was publicly available on Pearson VUE site.
Yeah,
That would be great. You can stop your share if you'd like, that's fine.
Yeah.
And while he's doing that, any other questions for Ty or our other speakers?
Yeah, if anybody has any question that's a conglomeration of something. I had a question, and that is, and this is for any of our panelists, so I won't call you separately, but what are some of the challenges getting feedback from your constituents? I know that, Uzma, you have a large program, so I'm sure it's not as challenging. And Ty, you said that this was a huge effort as well, but if you work with smaller organizations as well, or in your past lives, what are the most basic challenges getting feedback from constituents?
It's time. I think that's all of us in the research field just understand that we are being. I think I get invitations to participate in about like 20 surveys a day, and I might have time for one a week, right? So trying to get their attention and their time to help them see the value in giving that feedback is probably the biggest challenge. And so I found that my research team has almost turned into like a sales and marketing team of sorts, as well as we're trying to sell the survey to them. Like, please talk to us.
Yes, yes, yes. Hi, I would agree with you on that. It's time. And so for us, actually what we tend to do is as much as we can, we do try and incentivize them, especially when the questions that we are asking goes beyond a certain level of sometimes hours, right? Or it's in the middle of the day and so on. So we do try and incentivize them in a small way, but at the same time, to Ty's point, the feedback, what we do is we try and bring them into our process, right? So we try to communicate with them early and make sure that they understand that they're providing us valuable feedback that we need them for. So we sort of do that little, that dance with them. And it's really served us really well. So I would agree, it's time, and just picking, making sure no one's on vacation. So summertime, for example, is not the best time for us, but we found that actually March is a really good time for us to, when we initiate surveys, we do get responses back, very efficient and timely way. And it's the same with focus groups. We end up having more participation in March. And the other time is October, which is interesting to us. So I think it's also when you're asking for them to participate as well. Hope that's
great. And I have one last. Thank you. That's great. I have one last question, unless other people have other questions, and that is, and again, I guess it's biased because you have such large constituents, but is there a suggested number of stakeholders to include in your studies, and is that number different when you're going for qualitative versus quantitative results? Sorry,
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll jump in. So I'm not going to interview 30,000 people. So obviously I have to be a lot more selective when we're doing qualitative research in that form. My background's in cultural anthropology. I love participant observation. I think that, being in with them tells you a lot more than even just sitting in a room talking with folks. So we try to mix things up as much as we can on the qualitative side to maximize input from a smaller number of stakeholders, while then being able to have that inform what we go out to the larger number with. And right now, the numbers that we work with in the IT space is enough that we can actually take a survey out to the entire population. We are looking at some point doing sampling, and we do sample from the large population to validate our results in our statistical analysis. But the fact is that we can go out to everybody with a survey, but then again, it's as I mentioned before, just trying to get them to respond.
Right.
Yeah,
Do you have any
my background's sort of the opposite. I have more of a quantitative research background, and in my time at ACT, I've really come to see the value of getting really detailed feedback from a small number of expert users who have the expertise and background to really provide us with a lot of really good detailed feedback that we couldn't get from shooting out a survey to a few thousand people. So those COG labs or focus groups, they can be really helpful in identifying issues early on in the process and being able to deal with those effectively.
Thank you. That's excellent. Jason, Uzma, do you have anything to add to that?
Gentleman covered it beautifully. I concur.
Thank you all.
So
I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I do want to just do a couple of quick announcements. One, we are planning to hopefully host a meeting in December. We'll keep it virtual, and our program committee is also looking to content for the first quarter of 22. So stay tuned to LinkedIn or check your email, and we'll be sending out announcements with dates and times for the meetings. This has been recorded, so it will make that available through CNG's website shortly. I will also ask if there are any announcements. We always save time at the end of these sessions for any announcements on upcoming events, job openings, or anything else that your organization might do that you'd like to share with the group. All right, hearing none. Thank you again to our speakers for today. We appreciate you taking time to put this information together and blocking this session on your calendars. Thank you again to our sponsors. A special thank you to Alyssa and her team who worked to put this session together. So thank you all for that.
Thank you all for participating. It's been very, very wonderful working with you. Thank you, and with the whole team.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Yeah.